Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Transitional and Supportive Housing for Youth, the first of a series of sessions that were scheduled to take place at CHRA's Congress 2020 in Saskatoon. My name is Dominika Krzeminska, and I'm the Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. I would now like to introduce today's moderator, David French. David is Director of Policy and Planning at Away Home Canada, today's session sponsor. With more than 20 years experience working with Canada's most vulnerable young people, David has a passion for developing programs and policies that meet their unique needs. His approach to policy and program development harnesses the wisdom and knowledge of those in community and the voices of young people. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody joining us. I'm scrolling through the list of attendees, and I'm seeing a number of familiar faces and names, so that's good. As Dominika mentioned, we're working to make this as interactive as possible. So we'll be launching a series of 3 polls throughout the webinar period. And again, I've positioned some questions for our speakers, not to put them on the spot. They've been made aware of what questions they'll be answering. But I do encourage you to think about the questions that you may want to ask them as well. And again, place those in the chat box or keep them handy and ask them when the opportunity arises. I often find that engaging in these kinds of webinars can be an opportunity for real growth and sort of the dynamics of your own community organizations, and juxtaposing that with the presentations that are going to be coming forward, I think is a really important opportunity. As we're seeing with the reality of COVID-19, housing is healthcare, and we have 2 really special presentations for you from 2 really transformational organizations that are pushing the envelope on housing and how we support young people, not only through this pandemic, but future state. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more from the Quint Development Association, Len Usiskin and Regan Conway. And then we'll be hearing from a housing program through Woodgate Community Services, Michelle Germain, who's the Vice President of Policy, and Michael Bootsma, who's an architect with PARTISANS architecture firm. The information and their bios will be shared once the posting is live, and so you can get more information, and their contact information will be included as well. So before we jump into the presentation from Quint Development Association, we're going to launch our first poll. And as a bit of background, Away Home Canada, along with a number of other national partners, worked with the Child Welfare League of Canada to encourage governments to place moratoriums on young people leaving child welfare during this pandemic. And so this question is directly related to those realities in your communities. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to find your correct answer. Overwhelmingly, we're seeing that there still needs to be more done to support this population, which I would wholeheartedly agree. We're seeing that some of these moratoriums in communities are working, but more work needs to be done. And so with that, I will pass it over to Len Usiskin from the Quint Development Corporation. Take it away, Len.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. My name is Len Usiskin. I'm the Executive Director of Quint Development Corporation. So Quint is a multi-purpose community economic development organization whose mission is to enhance the economic and social well-being of Saskatoon's West Side core neighborhoods. The core neighborhoods have about 16,000 people living there and experience persistent social and economic disparities compared to the rest of the city. And these include high concentrations of poverty and aging housing stock that are in need of major repairs. Since 1995, we've been working on the development of a variety of affordable housing and transitional housing and employment services and social enterprise developments in the core neighborhoods of Saskatoon. The doors to the Quint's Male Youth Lodge opened in 2003. Quint and various partners recognized that there was a huge need for youth housing in Saskatoon. At the time, there was only one adult shelter in the city, and many of the male youth who were forced to go there didn't feel safe there. So there was a lot of organizing going on to create a special form of transitional housing for young men. So the Male Youth Lodge is a 5,000 square foot former boarding house. It has 10 bedrooms, and it's licensed for up to 10 residents, and it houses male youth ages 16 to 21 years of age, and it's staffed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The location of the youth lodge is in the west side core neighborhoods of Saskatoon, where Quint works. That was a bit of a controversial discussion amongst the partners. Some of them felt that the lodge should be located outside of the core, maybe in some suburban neighborhood where it was deemed to be safer. But we persisted that it should be in the core neighborhoods, because that is our mission as an organization, is to enhance the social and economic well-being of these neighborhoods. And we've been using housing and housing rejuvenation as a tool for neighborhood revitalization. And we'd already been working on setting up home ownership co-ops in the core, affordable rental, and other transitional housing in the core neighborhoods. And in addition to that, we had done consultation with the youth, a couple of focus groups, and they all felt that the core neighborhoods was the communities that they knew and felt comfortable in. And they also knew that these neighborhoods were where their community supports were, so they wanted to stay in. So the lodge is located in the inner city of Saskatoon. I just want to share a little bit about the capital and operating funding for the Male Youth Lodge. We received $350,000 from the Government of Canada's National Homelessness Initiative to buy and renovate the lodge. And then we had a commitment from 3 provincial government departments to provide operating funding. Initially, the funding was about $300,000 a year. You can see on the screen that today we're funded about $540,000 a year, and it's from 2 provincial ministries, Ministry of Social Services and the Ministry of Corrections and Public Safety. When we purchased the building, it was an old rundown boarding house. Our community economic development and housing experience resulted in creating both employment and energy outcomes from the renovation. We endeavored to create jobs and training opportunities through the renovation of the lodge, and we incorporated significant energy retrofits, which the house is highly insulated, has radiant in-floor heat in it, and this means that it's low utility costs and very comfortable for the youth. And then I just want to point out a little bit about an overview of the homelessness situation in Saskatoon and how that impacts on youth. Findings of the latest point-in-time homelessness count in the city, which was in 2018, almost 86% of the people experiencing homelessness are Indigenous. That's fairly common for, I think, the prairies, probably not so for other parts of the country, and there's a lot of historical reasons for that. And in addition, while 44% of first experienced homelessness as adults, 21% were children, 14 and under, and 35% were youth. And literature on Canadian homelessness indicates that those who first experience homelessness as youth are more likely to experience homelessness again later in life. The main cause of housing loss for youth were conflicts with parent or guardian and addictions and substance abuse, and also inability to pay rent was the next cause for both adults and youth. Of the 475 people experiencing homelessness in Saskatoon, 53% had been in foster care. Close to 80% did not remain in foster care until 18. And about almost 50% had completed some high school education, but not graduated. And the things they found most helpful to secure permanent, stable housing were finding a job, housing program supports, and affordable or low-income housing. So that's a bit of an overview, and now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Regan Conway, who manages the Male Youth Lodge, to tell you more specifically about the operations there.
Hi, I'm Regan Conway, the program manager of the Quint Male Youth Lodge. So the goal of the Youth Lodge is to provide safe housing for the youth while they're learning life skills and preparing to transition out of the Youth Lodge to independence. Staff work with each youth upon entering the lodge to design and implement goals that the youth wants to meet while living at the lodge. Staff are aware of case plans that each youth have with their young offender worker and or their family service worker, and develop the lodge goals to support these outcomes as well. Our focus is on supporting our residents around addictions, mental health issues, conflict resolution, as well as basic life and employment skills. Next. At the lodge, there's a mixed group of staff members working to support our residents. The Youth Lodge staff bring a wide variety of skills, training, and experience to the program. Our staff have first aid, CPR, and suicide intervention training, as well as crisis intervention training. We've been fortunate to have a loyal and gifted core group of staff. We have many long-term staff members who are committed to the Youth Lodge and the residents we support. There is a focus on building relationships with the residents. Staff are supports and mentors to the youth, and this is a large part of the success of our program. As well, the Youth Lodge is licensed by the Ministry of Social Services under the Residential Service Act. So the admissions to the lodge come to us through a referral process. The referrals come to myself from the family service worker or the young offender worker. And then the youth are invited to tour the lodge, meet staff, and ask questions. Our youth are generally coming to us from correctional institutions, family placements that have broken down, other group homes, and homeless youth who have requested support from the Ministry of Social Services. The Youth Lodge is not a mandatory program. Youth voluntarily choose to live at the lodge, and this has proven to be critical in operations to the success at the lodge. At the Youth Lodge, we work in conjunction with the Ministry of Social Services and the Ministry of Justice to make sure the youth are going to an appropriate placement that will meet their needs. The youth are always engaged in the referral process from the start, and it's important for the youth to see the lodge and meet the staff before deciding to live there. If there's a youth who cannot visit the lodge due to being incarcerated or outside of the city, staff will do phone interviews, or if they can, we will go and interview the youth where they are. Again, it's an important thing to note that living at the Youth Lodge is not mandatory, that it's a choice. Our youth, who are our youth? The average age of our youth is about 17, 50% are Indigenous, 35% are Caucasian, and 15 identify as other. Many of our youth are dealing with addictions, mental health issues, and gang involvement. They're coming to us from homes where there's parent-child conflict, addictions, unsafe environments for them to be living in, as well as youth corrections. They also come to us from other group homes or shelters. Some of our youth may be active gang members, and some may be associated with gangs due to family or friend involvement, and this is quite common for our youth. The programming that we offer at the lodge, there's a focus on education at the lodge. Staff support youth getting back into school or continuing to stay engaged and attending their school. There's weekly programming. We have recreation nights, encouraging youth to find positive, low to no cost activities. This is to help them have positive outlets when they leave the youth lodge. We also have an in-house life skills program. We consider this a teaching night, so topics might be about budgeting, how to grocery shop, do laundry, hygiene, learning differences between wants and needs. The youth are involved in deciding what they want to focus on. We have a weekly house meeting where the residents are encouraged to express the needs that they have in the house. So whether it's disagreements with each other and learning to work through those, or deciding what sorts of meals they want to have or they want to eat during the week. Staff also make sure that residents have access to community supports that they may need, such as an addictions worker, mental health supports, as well as community activities. We have youth that are involved in community sports, so football, hockey, basketball, cadets, art classes, as well as the band program in some of the high schools. Some of our changes over the years, the average age has lowered from 19 to 17, and we found that the average age has lowered due to changes in our contract with the Ministry of Social Services and their focus on providing housing to youth under the age of 18. Again, our primary focus is keeping youth in school, and this has shifted from the initial focus that was on employment in the beginning. Youth addictions has also changed. Now we're finding there's that crystal meth is the drug of choice, which we all know is quite a difficult drug to get off of. There's also been an increase of youth who come to us with diagnosed mental health issues. Many of our youth are on medication, and our referrals have become much more complex. We're looking at overlapping issues of addictions, mental health, and integrated traumas with young people. So we have found at the Lodge that there are many different ways to measure success. It's not just measured by a youth who graduates our program, but success can also be measured by providing stability for a youth who's never had that in his life, and he stabilizes for a period of time. There are some different youth stories and successes that we've had come out of the Lodge, and I wanted to share a couple to show some of the differences about how we view success. So we had a young man who came to us on his own. It was an unsafe environment that he was living at home, and he accessed the 16-17 program through social services. He moved into the youth lodge. He was attending high school regularly. He played in the school band. He ended up graduating high school. He got a part-time job, and he transitioned out of the youth lodge on his own, and he was living in an apartment with his brother. And this would be probably a typical story that people would think is view as a success. And then we had another young man who came to us, and he struggled with addiction. He had low self-esteem, little to no family support. He was in and out of different placements. Once he got to the Lodge, he did stabilize. He was taking his medication regularly, and he also found a part-time job. He made relationships with staff. Eventually, he couldn't sustain this and began to participate in illegal activities, which in turn, he then lost his placement. However, it's interesting to note that he still is connected to the youth lodge, as he'll stop by to say hi, or he will call the lodge for extra support or just to talk to somebody. So it might not seem like a typical success story where you think of somebody graduating and transitioning, but the fact that he stabilized for a while and continues to find support at the youth lodge, I think is a success story. And I think we have to remember that we have to view success in a variety of ways. So some of the statistics that we have on the Lodge. So since it opened in 2003 to March of this year, we've housed 566 youth. Of those youth, 80% attend school or an educational program within the community. 75% of those youth have gained some form of employment, and 111 days was the average length of stay at the youth lodge from April 2019 to March 2020. We do have a number of youth that have been with us for a year or more. As well, we have a number of youth that come and stay with us for, 1 or 2 or 3 months. It really depends on where the youth is at in their life and the supports that they're wanting. So we recognize that, and we want to support youth and meet them where they're at. Some of the keys to our success has been we have connections to supports within the community. Again, residents are not mandated to live at the lodge. We have a dedicated staff group. We believe that youth should have an input into where they're living, and we have close links between our staff and the resident support workers. Our partnerships have been key to the success of the lodge. The partnership between Quint and the Ministry of Social Services and the Ministry of Justice, as well as the government providing appropriate funding for the lodge to be able to have appropriate staffing and provide appropriate programming. Partnerships with other community organizations are also keys to our success. The YMCA allows the youth lodge to use their services for free. The youth enjoy going swimming, playing basketball, and weightlifting in the gym. Residents are connected to the White Buffalo Youth Lodge and have access to free gym services that they offer, as well as cultural services. EGADS is another youth organization in Saskatoon, and some of our youth access their outreach program as well as their day program if they're not registered in a mainstream school. And again, having youth have input in what happens at the lodge, from the goals that they work on to the skills they want to learn, all the way to the meals that they prepare in the house. Our young people transitioning from the lodge, about 35% transition to independent living. So that could be on their own or with friends, but it's into their own apartment. 20% return to family. 25% will transition to a different supported living home. So that could either mean that they require more or less supports than what the youth lodge can offer them. 5% of our youth will leave to go to detox or treatment, and 10% of our youth will return to custody. 5% are other, and that is generally youth that leave the lodge and don't leave the lodge without a departure plan, so they're not letting us know where they're choosing to go. It is vital that we focus on preventing youth homelessness. Prevention is a critical step towards an effective community response to youth homelessness. Not all incidents of youth homelessness can be prevented, but with appropriate targeted services and supports, many can be helped. Additionally, improving out-of-home supports and juvenile justice system, while also increasing supports to youth and family in crisis, have been shown to prevent youth homelessness. These supports can be access to recreational activities, education, and life skills programming. It is time for a proactive rather than a reactive approach to youth homelessness. There needs to be more investment in our youth. A lot are coming from poverty, dealing with intergenerational traumas, homes where there is addiction and mental health concerns, and there are many systemic issues that they are attempting to overcome, and they require supports to help address these issues. Governments need to view the supports as an investment in young people, as they have a significant return on the investment. Youth require a stable home that meets them where they're at. Preventing homelessness means that youth are housed. At its core, youth homelessness prevention is a housing-led response. Housing is a right. There also needs to be a variety of housing for youth, as a one-size-fits-all model will not work. There are many complex issues youth are facing, and to assume that one home can meet all those needs is a recipe for failure. Second stage housing for youth exiting the youth care system is vital. Quint is looking at an apartment for youth to be able to transition to from the youth lodge. They would have their own suite within an apartment complex. The complex would be staffed with a support worker to continue to support youth with their needs and issues that may come up for them. Youth needs, we know, are quite different than what an adult might need when they transition into the community. I just wanted to thank you for listening to our presentation, and we look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you, Len and Regan. I love those points you made, specifically around, ensuring that there's youth input into not only where they're housed, but how that housing looks. And your comments near the end there, Regan, about investments in young people, and that these are investments in young people, whether it be investments to ensure future housing stability, investments to ensure labor or workforce attachment or school completion. I think those are certain super important points to make. And I want to know more about the second stage housing piece of work. So keep me updated on that. Before we move into the presentation from Wood Green, we're going to launch another poll. And the rationale for this question came off of what we're hearing around the needs for innovative housing solutions during the pandemic, in that organizations have needed to step outside of the typical housing continuum and identify other housing options for those young people during this time. So with that, I'll launch the second poll. It's like a fairly even mix. Interesting. 35% saying yes, they have. Well, no, 33%. It's a sliding scale. Excellent. Thank you for your input. We'll summarize the data on these two and share that out with folks just to give you a sense of where people identified their vote. So moving on to the next presentation from Wood Green Community Services. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. I hope you can hear me all right. It's an honor to present after the work that Regan and Len are doing, because what we really are doing is picking up the thread on what housing models for youth transitioning out of care can look like. So we're going to walk you through a journey that we're on, inspired by many of the issues that have been discussed. So we started this process with some support from CMHC and the federal government, part of their national housing strategy. They created an innovation fund where folks like us right across the country can ask really complex questions and bring together the right kind of grouping of partners to come up with new solutions. So we've come together with Partisans. Michael's here with me, so he'll introduce himself. They're a private sector architecture firm. We are a community agency that delivers housing, as well as Process, which is a planning and community engagement firm. So just a little bit about who we are. As the lead applicant for this project, Wood Green Community Services is a fairly large multi-service agency in the city of Toronto. We have been around for 80 years, and we've really grown and expanded over the years to meet all kinds of needs within our community. We've always been an agency that asked, how can we push the envelope? How can we create new services that meet the changing needs of the areas that we serve? So we've grown into this organization where we work across 36 locations in the city. We house just under 1,500 people, and we see about 40,000 clients per year. Our mission, as you can see, is really to enhance self-sufficiency, promote well-being, and reduce poverty. And we are always looking for new ways to serve our clients, and that was really the inspiration for this project. So what are we really trying to solve here? On the topic of youth homelessness, it's no surprise probably to anyone on the call that 20% of the homeless population in Canada would identify as youth between the ages of 13 and 24 every year. And this probably doesn't include a lot of hidden homelessness, but by the records from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, there's up to 40,000 youth experiencing it. The other parts of the problem that are quite staggering is that almost 60% of youth who are homeless have reported to be involved in the child welfare system. So we're seeing a very specialized group of youth who are disproportionately ending up in precarious situations. And they're also youth who may be lacking essential life skills for success and to transition into adulthood, and may face a breadth of barriers related to trauma, experience with the criminal justice system, and mental health issues. So a number of years ago at Wood Green, we started a program called Free to Be, which is a youth-driven program really focused on coordinating housing and community-based services for specifically young people transitioning out of the child welfare system. So after a number of years of running this program, one thing that kept coming up alongside other barriers was that there weren't really great places for a lot of these youth to land. And it brought us to this sort of wicked problem of, what does a great place to live look like for youth who are aging out of the care system, both from a programmatic standpoint, service standpoint, where it's located. And one thing that we noticed a lot of people weren't paying attention to, which is the actual design of the program. So this is the very specific scope and the very specific question and challenge that we've taken on in this project. And it's, go to next slide. And I want to highlight too that our Free to Be program is part of a national movement focused around reducing youth homelessness. So there's 10 pilot programs across the country. Our program is part of Housing First for Youth model, which is a rights-based intervention for youth who are experiencing at risk of homelessness. And it's part of Making the Shift, which is a youth homelessness social innovation lab itself, with a mandate to contribute to the transformation of how we respond to youth homelessness through research, knowledge mobilization specific to youth homelessness prevention and housing stabilization. So I mentioned this just to show that, this is a very, very complex issue, and we certainly are not trying to take it all on. But in this project, we've really tried to hone in on what does great housing look like? How can we model new ways? And hopefully in the end, we come out with, very promising next steps. So at the end of the day, really what we're hoping to achieve by answering this question are better access to resources and supports for youth aging out of care. We also wanted to create a space for youth to design based on their perspective as experts. Using trauma-informed anti-oppressive frameworks that are not Eurocentric. So we have put youth at the center to tell us what they need and us what works for them. We're also really interested in pulling out unique models that can inform the development of more affordable housing developments for youth. So as an agency who owns and operates lots of housing, it is a dream of ours. We're not just doing this for the intellectual pursuits, but we hope to come up with a model that we ourselves can try and that can be tried and scaled across the country as needed. So I wanted to pause a little bit and talk, why Social Innovation Lab? There's lots of different questions out there, and there's lots of different approaches to questions. So for us, because of how complex this challenge was, it didn't have one person to solve it. If we could have just gone to the architecture firm and said, design us a new housing model, we probably would have done that. But really what we needed to understand the problem in new ways. We needed to understand where there are policy barriers, what was the development community saying, what were the services that were needed. The other thing is we wanted to create sort of a safe space to experiment. Where we can ask stupid questions, where we can play with ideas, where it's not so high stakes, because often we're finding ourselves in, writing proposals, doing real estate deals, managing people who are experiencing a crisis in real time. And those aren't places where you get to play. Those are places where you need to respond. So as an organization, we actively look for, funding and partners to do this kind of experimentation. And at the end of the day, the Social Innovation Lab offers you know, it's not just one size fits all. Oh no, you can go to the next one. That's great. But really it offers an approach. So there's different phases for defining a problem, thinking about things differently, bringing people together, using specific tools that can help you get at things and find new perspectives, and really bringing together teams from different organizations, partners who might be unlikely allies, and participants from across different perspectives, so that you come out with something that's different from where you started. And this is just a little visual. I apologize, it's a little fuzzy, just to show you a little bit about the process that you go through. So we start with a problem and then we define it, and then we bring in youth and we bring in other experts, and we sort of go back and forth trying to define things, trying to put things forward in order to get to a new space. And where we hope to come out at the end is pilot. And I know this looks a little linear, but sometimes it doesn't feel quite so linear. So sometimes you go back and then you go forward. And we've been working on this, I believe, since the fall. It feels, I guess the last few months feel like a year. But we've taken an approach to really pull on 4 buckets to learn. One is youth workshops. So starting in the fall, we put together a call for youth who some of which we have worked with through our programming here at Wood Green, some of which were just in networks of networks. So youth who had experience in the child care welfare system, or youth who had experience with homelessness or close to homelessness. So we convened a small group and we worked with them very intensely over a series of workshops to really unpack what their experience was. So we weren't solving a problem here, we were just listening and understanding what their perspective was. At the same time, we cast a very wide net to do key informant interviews. So we talked to people all over the world who ran youth housing, who had different services, and we really took the opportunity to look at design elements for different kinds of transitional and supportive housing across the globe. You know, often when you're working in this space, you don't get the luxury of looking at beautifully, very innovative design, and we really wanted to emphasize that in this project. We also did a precedent scan, so building on, what are the best and emerging practices, what does beautiful design look like in housing across the globe, and finally a programmatic review where we looked both at the literature around, what makes great housing, as well as, what services are available, what do people need, what's available within the system, and how does the ecosystem itself, so taking into account public policy and financing and all of those components. And I just wanted to show a few photos of what some of the youth workshops looked like. So we can just click through, but we worked with youth to really go through drawings, work through ideas, pull things apart and put them together. As you can see, it was a very hands-on activity over the course, I think it was 3 weekend days, to really understand what they wanted, what they needed, what they thought was great, what was garbage. And this is, has been able to feed us these ingredients that we have right now at this part in the lab, so that we can start to build it back up into new and promising models that we hope to test. So out of all of the work to date, and we are about a little more than halfway through the project, we've identified some emerging themes, and these actually align very well with some of the themes that Regan was saying. So no surprise, but it's great to validate and add. So one is that, a need to understand what this kind of housing is. So, what are we talking about, and what are the timeframes in which youth are looking for housing? Is it short term? Is it long term? That youth-centered design must be at the core. So, building on human-centered and user-centered design principles. How do we bring people in who are actually going to use it at the very beginning? Really creating an opportunity for co-creation. So we're not just thinking of small, one house over here. We're talking about a system, and a system that somebody might transition throughout their life, and how do we make sure that the connective tissue between there is strong. we heard, no surprise, that place matters. So finding the right site for youth housing. You could build the most beautiful house in the middle of a cornfield somewhere, but you know, they may not want to live there. So how do you find the right place that works? We also heard a lot about construction constraints and how there's a need and an opportunity to breed innovation. Again, with financing, you know, we had to get creative with the math and how we would do things. So we certainly looked at how you leverage land, public land, all sorts of different options. And we came to, you know, leading with community engagement and looking at wraparound program models. So similar to a lot of the work that Len and Regan were speaking to, but almost what do bespoke wraparound models look like for different cohorts? And I'll pass it to Michael.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So thanks everyone for attending this session. I'm Michael from Partisans. We're a Toronto-based architecture studio of about 20 people. We design at all scales, from industrial design and lighting all the way through housing, restaurants, commercial spaces to city and regional planning initiatives. We're passionate about the built environment, so we're very excited to be part of the discourse on youth housing and housing affordability, as it's one of the biggest issues facing us today that we as architects can help tackle. So as Michelle mentioned, we undertook various research threads, holding workshops with youth, looking at global housing precedents and programming precedents, literature reviews, and interviews with the spectrum of people who are involved in creating housing, particularly housing for youth. So developers, architects, service providers, policymakers, and of course, most importantly, the youth themselves. So there were many important ideas which emerged from our research. I think Quint has already incorporated many of them into the Male Youth Lodge that Len and Regan just presented. So I'm glad that we got to learn a little bit more about their project. There isn't too much time today to get through all the research that we've done to date. So I'll try and give a broad overview with one or two specific examples from each primary topic. So one of the core questions we broached is, what is the right type of housing for youth transitioning out of care? Current models for youth housing typically sit within a continuum of typologies, but there's no one succinct definition. And really that's important and better, because there's no one succinct identity for youth leaving care. We see a diversity of approaches as necessary to support the diversity of the youth themselves. And as Michelle mentioned, we spoke with all sorts of different levels of policymakers and service providers to determine really the best approach and how we can get this going, because speed really is a critical factor in this. I think we're all aware of how desperate the affordable housing situation is, and as Quint mentioned, the problem of youth facing homelessness and the perpetuation of homelessness that can create. So while this study was focused on a very specific segment of housing, we felt the pressing need for affordable housing permeating every facet of our research. And we need all levels of stakeholders, policymakers, service providers, and developers to be mobilized to build quickly. At the same time, though, our research consistently spoke to the fact that each project is an act of community building and needs to aspire not just to address the immediate needs of youth, but to contribute to the neighborhoods and the cities that they live in and that the projects are built in. So that speaks again to the requirements and importance of site. So perfect sites are really rare or unreasonably expensive. Our policymakers, partners need to be participants in thinking laterally about this issue. For instance, land can be made more accessible if affordable housing developments can be paired with other uses like community amenities. In Chicago, for instance, the city's housing authority, the public library system, and 2 private developers built affordable housing paired with libraries in underserved communities. So that made sites that might be too expensive to build one of the projects on more accessible when both were combined. Another interesting approach was this project in the suburbs of Stockholm, which built on city lands that were sitting idle, awaiting permanent use, which was decades away from approval. So the name of the project itself is Snabbehouse, which literally means fast house. The architect and developer created a modular temporary building that could be erected quickly remain temporarily until permanent use for the land was determined, and then be disassembled and reassembled elsewhere. So that kind of transitions into construction constraints and how they can actually help new models be developed. So the architects we spoke with from around the globe saw building within budgets, schedule, and site constraints as opportunities for research and development rather than as hindrances to creativity. Their projects were given the freedom to break the norms and to provide unique forms of housing. So the cheap raw materials used in this project in Copenhagen, like rough wood and exposed precast concrete, weren't hidden away. They were actually highlighted and ended up being thoroughly appreciated by the residents for their texture and their uniqueness. And at Snava House, the architect created a repeatable module wider than a typical container, but sized to be under the maximum truckable load. So the module could be brought to site quickly and erected quickly, and the module fit within a cast-on site structure for efficient assembly. And this also allowed for, because everything was standardized, to focus more on the particularities of the design within each unit. So operations and maintenance. Unfortunately, there aren't really any pretty pictures for this one, but some of the approaches are straightforward, and Quint mentioned a couple of them before, such as retrofitting existing buildings with energy efficient systems wherever possible to save on operations costs, or using standardized approaches to consolidating maintenance expenditures. For instance, deploying the same HVAC unit across multiple properties to allow facilities management teams to stockpile resources or to procure systems in bulk. And the importance of actually funding and financing these projects is critical. So attracting interest from developers is a key to increasing the stock of available affordable housing and available housing for youth. For instance, allowing the reparceling of land can permit developers to phase their developments, reducing their overall risk, so that these sites that might otherwise be unattractive become more approachable. And similarly, affordable housing developments on difficult sites like this one in Carmel Place in New York can be made more attractive through tax incentives, a reduction in land charges or land costs where the government owns the land, or allowing for increased densities to improve construction efficiencies. And key to our whole research is really focusing on youth at the core of the design and providing them with the supports that they need to develop independence and full lives. So some of the key lessons that we took from our workshops with youth, the housing scan, and from our interviews were an emphasis on things like shared space with varying degrees of engagement, while support services and common areas and amenity spaces like teaching kitchens or computer rooms are important. Well-designed passive communal spaces like courtyards and staircases can play as much, if not more, of a role in generating interactions and forming community. Individuals can then choose whether they're interacting with their fellow residents, but they can still engage in and be seen by the community every time they pass through. More nuanced approaches were also on display, so they can improve the variety and opportunities for interaction. For instance, in this example from a housing project in England, the kitchen is positioned directly adjacent to the entry door so that when a resident is cooking and they open the door to let fresh air in, they also potentially invite casual interactions with anybody who's passing by and through the courtyard. At the same time, personal space is critical. The youth we are proposing to build for have had little opportunity to choose how they've lived up until leaving care. So the chance to personalize their space is really important. Going back to the first key point, there needs to be a broad diversity of housing available if we hope to support individuals who each have already lived unique and deep experiences. And as Michelle noted, wraparound support programs are really what support the youth and help them develop that independence and thrive in their lives. So alongside a diversity of building types, we found a wide variety of program types and a few kind of uniquely compelling models. For instance, in this project in Vienna, students are share a pod of 3 to 4 rooms with individuals who have experienced homelessness. The project was actually initiated by the students themselves and now hosts multiple community programs on its rooftop terrace and includes a cafe on the ground floor where residents from the building and the surrounding community can gather. So a similar model we envision could be applied to youth interacting with students or with intergenerational housing opportunities and with peer mentorship. So and then the next steps. Michelle, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, I'll jump back in. Thank you, Michael. So just wanted to recap that we're in the middle of this project. We're just starting phase 4, where we've done all of our research and we're going to take everything that we've learned with the folks that we've been working with and start to refine, review, and validate what we see as promising and put together new models that at the end we will put out a report and hopefully look for opportunities to pilot these new models of housing. And one very interesting thing is because of COVID, this was supposed to be in person. However, we are looking to adapt how we're going to build the different models. So there might be an opportunity to do a virtual engagement with a larger pool of people. So if there's interest, we're certainly open to that, and including people who we wouldn't have been able to invite in person here in Toronto. And finally, you know, the dream here is that we come up with ideas that feed many masters. You know, we're not looking that we'll come out with a perfect model that fixes youth homelessness, but we'll be able to come up with something that could be considered for, you know, scaling up. How are we impacting the systems in which we're working in and creating a more enabling policy environment? Scaling out, you know, if we do find something that's quite promising and we're able to demonstrate it, how might we replicate it across the country and serve many youth, and scale deep. So, you know, as Regan and Len's model show, there's needs to be very specific models for very specific, you know, youth, you know, Indigenous youth, women, people LGBTQ. So how might we scale deep on some of these models and really build out things that will help people thrive into adulthood? So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle and Michael. I love the framing around scale up, scale out, and scale deep. I think that's an important opportunity for any of our community organizations when they can to really track the successes of these types of models, but then also, as we'll get to in the questions, really dig deep into some of the challenges you faced in the design and implementation phases of this work and the ongoing delivery of this work. I think that we can really learn from it. While the sector is large, it can be very small as well at times. And so I think it's important that when we can share as much as possible. And to your points, Michael and Michelle, around engaging young people, of course, and, you know, we forget about their ability and their consciousness towards their needs and also their experiences. So I appreciate you devoting so much time to engaging them in this process and ensuring that their voices are heard. And I think through their altruistic motivation too, they're sort of looking to think about the work differently for those who may follow behind them. And so whenever we can, if we can position that work to ensure that they're engaged, I think it's far more sustainable. So that concludes the formality of the presentations, and now we will roll into some specific questions that I have for our panelists. And then if you have your questions, if you've been saving them, place those in the chat box and we'll get to those in a moment. But so questions to the panelists, and we'll look for you all to sort of turn your microphones on and your webcams, and we will get to the Q&A portion of this and put you all on the spot. That's okay. So first question, in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic, how have you adjusted your service delivery models to ensure supports to young people have not been interrupted? Who wants to go first?
Speaking for the Youth Lodge, this is Regan. We've had to adjust our service delivery a little bit due to the fact that we have to think about the safety of the residents that are in the Youth Lodge as well as our staff. You know, we did have initially at the beginning of the pandemic, we did have some issues with staffing. So it was we had to adjust sort of how we were delivering services to our young people. But I think that for the most part, we've kept things pretty normal for the young people living at the Youth Lodge, and also in terms of referrals coming into the Youth Lodge that come to us through the Ministry of Social Services. We've tried to keep it as sort of normal as possible, but we have had to put some things in place just in terms of keeping people safe during this pandemic.
I can just add to that. Obviously, we had to put some pretty rigorous protocols in place in terms of hygiene and physical distancing, and we had one youth who was showing some symptoms at one point, and so we had to figure out how we can quarantine people in their rooms, those kinds of things. And you can imagine a house full of 17-year-olds and telling them they all have to stay home for a month. It can be challenging, and there's a lot of pressure to go out and hang out with your friends, and so yeah, it's been challenging for sure.
Yeah, and I'm happy to respond as well. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we're a pretty large multi-service agency, and in the way that we work with people, a lot of ways we've had to move digital, in a lot of the one-to-one and our counseling services, in our case management. So I know specifically with youth in our Free to Be program, a lot of it has gone to phone and to digital. However, we have hit some very interesting bumps. So some of our youth, for example, had been enrolled in university, and they were told that they had quite quickly out of their university residences. So our teams had to work with them to find permanent housing very quickly. I think it was April 1st. So shut down about March 15th. We were working with a couple of people to find somewhere where they felt safe and somewhere where they could afford. So we were able to do it through a Free to Be program, but it just reinforced that the challenge of finding the right place for youth who don't have an aunt whose couch they can stay on and weren't able to go back to their parents. So a crisis sort of became a much larger crisis.
Excellent. Anything to add, Michael?
I mean, we're seeing evidence in the architecture profession of the critical aspect of space itself, whether it's your home environment or public spaces, and people who are in affordable or smaller units really need access to those environments, just for mental well-being and for physical fitness. Right? It's really critical, and so I think that there's a shift in perspective of how space needs to be shaped in the future.
Great, excellent, thank you. And so, as I alluded to, there are phases within your work, and that goes from the idea phase, whether it's on a napkin or a piece of paper, to the implementation phase and to the delivery phase. And so, for our panelists, what have been your biggest learnings from those phases, and what else can you share with attendees? You don't have to select all phases. Maybe your biggest learnings.
I'm happy to go first on this one. You have to go slow to go fast. We were really eager to jump in, talk to everyone, find the models, come out with the magical solution. And it was the reason why I pulled out that slide about how you kind of have to go forward and then go backwards. But in order to get to the root of a lot of the challenges, we really had to spend a lot of time with people. And, you know, we couldn't just get right at it straightforward. So through all of our research processes, and also working together. I mean, you have a community agency and, you know, this hotshot, if you don't mind me saying, architecture firm coming together to solve a problem for the first time. So even the partnership itself, we had to really get to know each other and understand how to bridge those, you know, the gaps in our understanding and how we work. So it's a learning that we would certainly take into the implementation phase, which is if we're onto something and we're going to do something, how do we create the space and go slow? Even when the pressure, you know, it's such a, I brought this up because it's such a crisis. You know, there's so many homeless youth. How could we dare to go slow to fix it? So that tension has been a big learning that, you know, it doesn't feel good, but the hope is that we take the time, we come up with things, and the impact will be worth it when we get there. So.
Yeah, and speaking maybe a little bit more to that, the idea of looping back and kind of revisiting steps before, I think our engagement with the youth was a critical phase and a continuing phase. It wasn't just a one-time engagement where we had the workshops and then they left. We were very purposeful in trying to reach out and continuing to talk with them and work with them and really understand the lives that they were living and how supports would affect them and what their needs really were. And I'm really excited to continue that engagement.
I could jump in. One of the things when we were developing the Youth Lodge, we did a series of consultations with youth. We held a couple of focus groups with youth who might be potential residents at the lodge, and those we learned a lot. There was kind of interesting what we thought were the parameters of what it would look like, and what would be the rules, and you know, all that stuff. When the youth had a much different view, and actually they were more strict about what they wanted to see in terms of the how they wanted it run. They wanted to ensure that it was a safe place, and so we learned a lot. And I think I can't downplay this enough. And I know that Regan, that's continuing goes on probably monthly or weekly at the lodge, even till over the last 17 years. So that was one thing. The other thing that I would say that we found over the implementation and the operating phases of the Male Youth Lodges, as we mentioned, we are funded by two ministries of the provincial government, and it's interesting how, for the most part, it's a very good relationship with the ministries, but there always are these little tensions when you're working with governments about what are their needs? How are we meeting their specific needs? And currently, the provincial government's needs is more about how do we help meet their crisis in youth homelessness, and so we're trying to fill. They're making referrals that they have youth in their custody that they need placements for, whether they're appropriate or not. But when we first set it up, it was more, we were also accepting referrals from the community and from schools and from other community-based organizations. But that all boils down to whether it's sort of a crisis management sort of philosophy at government versus a prevention kind of approach, right? And that goes on it's sort of on a wave all the time, eh? It's sometimes, you know, you get a more progressive government or people in government that want to invest in prevention, but then all of a sudden it's crisis, right? And we're only going to be able to fund you if you house youth who are in immediate crisis mode, right? So those kinds of positive tensions that we're always sort of feeling in our relationships.
Regan, anything to add?
I was going to say, for myself, like I haven't been at the Youth Lodge since the beginning. I've been managing for 7 years now, and I think that, you know, the one thing that I take away from the work that I do is just that youth are always changing, right? And that's one of the slides that we had in the presentation about needs that we had in 2003 as opposed to some of the needs that we have now in 2020. And so I think we always have to recognize that we need to be fluid, and we need to listen to the young people and the needs that they have in them in those moments, and not you know, continue to use old models that might not be working in the present, right? So, and I think that at Quint we've done a really good job. You know, I mean, the Youth Lodge has been around for 17 years, and we continue to change and progress with the complexities of youth and stuff that we're receiving now. And so I think it's important to have youth involvement and to listen to what the youth are saying. And I think that that's the biggest learning that you can take away when you're looking at youth housing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add too, when we were doing the implementation phase too, it was really important getting a commitment from for operating funds from government, and that was how we were able to leverage the capital dollars. It's always the capital dollars. It's hard to find capital dollars, but it's much harder to secure ongoing operating funding for these projects too, right? And that's that if you can get the commitment to support the operations of these things and convince governments that these are investments and there's social returns on these that are going to save them money over the long term. If you know, investing in youth is saving governments money, because the alternative is more incarceration, more justice, more bad health. You know, all the things that go with poverty. And if we can interrupt those cycles, those are positive for everybody.
I actually gave Len $20 to segue into my last question, so I'm on your way, Len. But so specifically speaking about, you know, integrating housing and supports, I'm a firm believer in that these new opportunities for infrastructure or builds should also come with the opportunity or the requirement to better understand the needs of that organization moving forward, or the housing solution going forward, and that those support dollars are in place. And so, having said that, how have you been able to ensure your programs are sustainable and can broadly speak to not only housing outcomes, but outcomes that speak to, you know, around prevention, around resiliency, connection to culture, and our connection to family and natural supports? Because it's a fine balance in the work that you're doing, because as you said, a number of you have multiple funders. So how have you been able to balance those, generating those kinds of outcomes?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to, you know, obviously not this particular project, but to our housing more broadly. It's been a few things. One has been stacking. So I agree with Len, it's very challenging to find, you know, operational funding for a specific program. So we as an agency have looked at stacking different kinds of government grants and different kinds of subsidies. We also have created different bespoke models for different groups. So we have a specific group for, you know, homeless, street-involved men over the age of 65, and they need very specific things. So we've taken, you know, there's no one size fits all to how we do it. When the other piece, I would say, and we're not perfect at this, but we're always trying to get better, is being able to demonstrate that social return on investment by capturing data and telling stories. I know all of us are under pressure to constantly show what it is we're doing and why it's so important. But that's been the approach generally. And then, you know, developing strong relationships over long term. So, you know, not just getting stuck in cycles of the government, but how are we sustaining relationships so that we're able to demonstrate what we do a really good job, have partners from different sectors, and be able to serve very specific needs. So it's not there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, but that is our approach.
Excellent. Then Regan, anything to add?
Well, I mean, we're basically a community economic development organization, but that does a lot of housing work as part of our strategy to revitalize the neighborhoods. So our motto in all of our housing projects has been that it's always more than just 4 walls and a roof. So that goes to make housing projects successful. And we try and work holistically to strengthen the communities that live in the housing, and we want to strengthen cultures. And we're a multi-purpose organization so that the residents not only benefit from the staff that are directly working with the youth, but they can benefit from all the other programs, employment programs, social enterprises that we do, and we partner a lot with other organizations as well. So we're trying to we're not working in isolation here. We're working together with a lot of different organizations and other programs within our organization to add as much value and create as much community as we possibly can with not only the Youth Lodge, but with all of our programs that we do, right?
Excellent.
Yeah, I think, building on that point, I think Len has touched on a number of the ideas that really emerged as key and critical to successful projects that we've seen from around the globe, and that's developing a sense of community, both within the building and engaging with the surrounding neighborhood. Even though, as Michelle mentioned, we're really eager to get these projects in the ground and built so that we can serve this really important pressing need. It really needs to be seen as an active city building. Every project isn't just a building on its own. It's part of a larger community. It's part of how we envision we as a society need to live and the people that we serve.
Love it. Before we move on, Regan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Len touched on a lot of the points just about, at the Youth Lodge and how we're connected to Quint as a whole, and we share a lot of services as well as our, the partnerships that we've developed, with our government partners as well as community partners to support and connect our youth to, services outside of the Youth Lodge, which is important, for when they're transitioning out of the lodge, is to be able to connect to those other community supports so that they have other people to lean on as well when they're living on their own. So
great. We do have a couple of questions from attendees, but before we do that, I want to jump into the last poll question. And it comes off, the context for that question is that we're hearing that community organizations are finding it increasingly challenging to not only support harm reduction, but be innovative around supporting harm reduction given isolation and where young people are at with either heightened addiction concerns or their own mental health. And so this last poll, we'll launch it for 30 seconds and then we'll get into questions from attendees. We do only have one question in the chat box, so maybe I'll launch it quick so we can get as many people as possible to hear it. And it's from Corey Wilson. And his question is, what is your organization's strategic plan for permanent housing, landlord registry, or acquiring a building for your agency to manage? Who wants to go first?
Well, we have at Quint, we do a series of, we have transitional housing and we have affordable rental housing. And for many years, we were doing neighborhood home ownership co-ops as well. So we're trying to create home ownership opportunities for low-income families. So it's a multi-strategy, multifaceted approach to providing affordable housing and transitional housing. So I'm not sure I'm answering that question. I'm not sure I fully understood it as well.
Maybe Michelle, if you have anything to add, and then we can look to clarify.
Yeah, I'm sorry, can you repeat it? Now I've just got confused too.
Yeah, no worries. What is your organization's strategic plan for permanent housing, landlord registry, or acquiring a building for your agency to manage?
Right, okay. Well, you know, it is part of our strategic plan to scale up the housing that we offer. So we currently have about 1,000 units. And over the next 10 years, we hope to provide up to 3,000 units. So we've set an organizational target. Before COVID, we had a couple of strategies of how to get there. One was leveraging the real estate that we owned as an organization to add density and redevelop the sites, which we are in the process of doing at a couple of our sites already. The second was working with developers. So in Ontario, we have inclusionary zoning coming through the door. It's a new public policy that will mandate a certain percentage of affordable housing. So as a community agency that provides housing, we're interested in working with developers to take on those affordable units. And then the last, which I think gets to what the question is around acquisition. So it is on our radar. You know, we look at acquisition probably out of two lenses. One is, are there multi-residential buildings, or is there real estate that our agency can purchase or acquire and take over? The other way, which we actually just did this year, is, are there other agencies that we might want to merge with and work collaboratively? So recently we merged with another agency called AIS that works with similar, you know, seniors with complex needs. A lot of our clients are seniors with complex needs. So our strategy is pretty much to expand, and we've picked a couple of lanes with how we do that. And I don't know what the world will look like after the pandemic, but we hope, you know, that we can continue to meet this crazy demand for housing, and similar to Len, across the spectrum of different kinds of housing, so that, you know, we're not looking to just be a landlord for fun. We're looking to, you know, provide some security as a social determinant of health, and then wrap around programs and build community so that we're living in a great city.
That's great. Michael, Regan, anything to add?
I'll just add maybe that while we started off doing affordable home ownership co-ops, we were finding out that because we're trying to work in low-income neighborhoods with a lot of low-income residents and families. Most of the people that were interested in affordable housing weren't eligible for home ownership. So affordable rental, really, if we're really talking about creating affordable housing that's accessible to low-income families and individuals, it's got to be rental. But how do you do rental that creates a sense of community ownership and a sense of control? That really is the question that we grapple with. And so we set up tenants associations, and we do eviction prevention programs. So we're trying to do, like I said before, we're our motto is more than four walls and a roof. We're trying to create senses. We're trying to build community within every type of a housing arrangement that we establish.
Excellent. Thank you for your responses. It's not easy being put on the spot. Those are all the questions we have in the chat box. And so before I turn it back over to Dominica, I just want to, are the presenters' emails available for further questions after the session? Yes, we'll make those available. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, before we wrap up, I want to thank, on behalf of Away Home Canada, I want to thank both organizations for their time today and really digging into these dynamics and opportunities that exist for the work. And again, how to push us all forward collectively, I think, is the overall goal. And I want to thank CHRA for extending the opportunity to make these presentations available. And it was a tough decision to not move forward with the Congress, but I think the opportunity to create this accessible environment to learn about these programs and to, again, share some faces and maybe some new faces, not the ones you're used to seeing on weekly Zoom calls. I think that's always a bright side of the work too. So I'll turn it back over to Dominica. Thank you again from Away Home Canada, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, David. And I echo your thoughts. I think this was an excellent presentation, and I thank you all for everyone who participated, and to David, Regan, Len, Michelle, and Michael for the fantastic content. I just wanted to let everyone know again that today's webinar recording, along with the emails of the presenters and the presentations in PDF format, will be sent around to the participants in the next day or so, and also that the webinar recording will be shared on CHRA's website in the next day or so. Finally, I just wanted to let everyone know that this session is actually part of our session summary series that we are able to put together each year at Congress through generous funding from BC Housing. And so in the next few months, I believe in September, we'll be releasing all of these session summaries that will be published on CHRA's website. So definitely look out for that, as there will be more information about what you just heard today, and probably some updates about the project coming from Michelle and Michael. So again, thank you everyone for participating. Take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.